everyone. Welcome back to Inquire Live at Gameday Central alongside Jeff McLane. I am Olivia Reiner. We are live from the MetLife Stadium press box, getting set for the Eagles' preseason finale. Jeff, I can't believe those words are coming out of my mouth right now. Against the New York Jets. It has been a long road throughout training camp and these last couple of preseason games. Finally, the Eagles end things tonight, just ahead of roster cutdown day on Tuesday. Jeff, how you feeling?
Great. Oh, joy that the preseason is almost over. Yeah, not exactly the most meaningful game, but it's not lost on me that the game does have some meaning for the 40 or so players that are going to play tonight. A few of which will make the roster. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll come back on the practice squad. Maybe they're just auditioning for other teams that may be in need of a guy for a particular position. So, while we may look at this game as meaningless in terms of the overall structure of things and probably be forgetful in a day or two, it does have meaning for a lot of the guys out there, and just a few of them should be able to, maybe more than a few of them, but there's a handful of spots open, let's say, for the 53-man roster cut down, which will come Tuesday at 4 o'clock.
We will preview some of those storylines that you're going to want to keep an eye on in today's game. But before we get into that, just a reminder, you can be a part of our conversation. If you head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, you can leave a comment or a question down there in the chat. Also, if you're watching over on social media, YouTube, X, formerly known as Twitter, Facebook, leave us a comment there too. We will get to some of your questions throughout our show today. All right, Jeff, let's jump right into it. Let's start with the biggest injury news coming out of this week. It's the loss of Johnny Wilson, unfortunately, for the second-year Eagles receiver. He underwent season-ending surgery to his ankle and to his knee, and after a really tough-looking injury that he sustained earlier this week on Tuesday, got rolled up on in team drills. I watched as he was walking off, couldn't put any weight on his left leg, ultimately got carted back to the indoor area of the practice facility from the medical tent. So really tough news there for Johnny Wilson, who started off pretty slow, I would say, in camp and was gradually starting to come on, build some consistency, make some big plays, some big contested catches, as he has been known to be able to do as a really tall receiver. So tough news for Johnny Wilson. However, this has ripple effects throughout the entire receivers corps, especially at the bottom of the depth chart. It is a really crowded group down at the bottom. How do you feel like, Jeff, this could potentially affect that group that is especially vying to make the 53-man roster?
Yeah, I guess I'll start first with just Johnny and just what I know about the injury. It's not an ACL. It's very rare that you hear knee and ankle surgery. So it does not bear well potentially for his future. He's done for the season, and I imagine it's ligament damage, but not specific to just the knee or the ACL. So still a little bit of uncertainty about what exactly it looks like. But something that it's going to take a while for him to come back from, I imagine. In terms of the rest of the roster, I guess, this is why Howie Roseman makes moves at certain positions. I'm not saying that he was anticipating that Johnny Wilson was going to get hurt just a couple of days later after trading for John Metchie, but it does speak to Howie's foresight when he does make some moves. And I think the position already was a little thin. I think they lack guys beyond the first three that you would think could step in there and maybe get you through a week if you didn't have A.J. Brown or Devontae Smith. We saw that last week. They struggled when they were without both or one of those guys. I think Metchie probably at this point will be guaranteed a roster spot just because of the trade. What they didn't give up a lot for him, but they want to see him. They want to give him some time before they make a decision on him, and certainly Johnny Wilson getting injured will open up that for him. I guess it's after that it's a little uncertain. Anais Smith is second year, former fifth round pick. The Eagles do things with him that suggest that he'll be back, returning punts where they have him on the depth chart. You've probably heard me say this before too. I'm not completely in love with Anais as a receiver. I think he bobbles too many passes. Is not especially big. Is quick, but I think to offset what you lack in size, you got to be super quick. That being said, it's not like he's top of the line receiver. Maybe he lasts for a year. And Darius Cooper is the guy that's really kind of popped, an undrafted rookie, and he probably on the bubble, probably on the right side of the bubble before the injury. Now, with after the injury, probably guaranteed a spot. The Eagles certainly do like him. The way they've been using him in practices, sometimes taking reps with the first team, would suggest that he is going to stick around. They've also started using him on special teams, another sign that they're trying to find a role for him.
Cooper has inside-outside versatility, which would also seem to threaten someone like Anais Smith, who primarily plays in the slot. Jeff, I thought this was really interesting when Jalen Hurts was talking about Darius Cooper the other day. He mentioned that he has really strong hands, and that's not something we have seen necessarily from Anais Smith over the last this past year, as he has since the Eagles drafted him, and that has been one of his weaknesses. He has been more involved lately. We'll see what ends up happening to the both of them as the roster cutdown gets closer and closer. Let's go back to John Metchie, though. You mentioned, Jeff, the Eagles acquired him from the Houston Texans in exchange for tight end Harrison Bryant, a late round pick swap. The two of them were most likely not going to make their respective rosters, so it makes sense that the Eagles would go out and get a guy that they could potentially have some use for in the receivers room. He has quite the interesting journey to this point. He had a really standout college career at Alabama, was a college teammate of Devontae Smith, and we saw the two of them reunite at practice for the first time the other day, so that was exciting to see to get to see them together. However, he also has dealt with a number of different injuries and ailments. He tore his ACL in college. He sat out of the entire 2022 rookie season after being diagnosed with leukemia, and now he's still just trying to find his footing in the league. It was the last couple of years for him. He had 16 receptions for 158 yards in 16 games in 2023, 24 receptions for 254 yards, and a touchdown in 2024. So still really looking to carve out a role that those respective receiving totals ranked 8th and 6th on the Texans respectively at the time. When you look at the landscape of this Eagles offense and the distributions of the targets and everything that kind of goes on within this offense, what role could you envision for Metchie potentially, or at least what do the Eagles hope he can develop into as he gets footing underneath of him in this Eagles offense?
Well, I guess it's the Johnny Wilson role. I thought that he was essentially locked into that 4 spot. I mean, that's where he played as a rookie, which is rundowns, primarily a blocker. And that's what they wanted first and foremost out of Johnny. Maybe there have been a few more passes sent his way, maybe a few more in the red zone because of his size. Although I just don't see great reason for taking away targets from A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert. But you need that fourth guy on certain run plays. You want to have a better blocker than I know Devontae can get it done, but he's not especially great at that. AJ's probably a little better at that, but on certain play, Jahan Dotson, on the smaller side, certainly you could sub before Johnny's injury, sub him in for Jahan Dotson. I think Nick said something about Metchie's blocking abilities, so maybe he can fill that role. But also as a receiver, I mean, again, these guys are probably not going to be healthy for all 17. When I'm talking about the top 3 guys, someone's going to be out, so you want to have a depth at that position in case someone gets hurt and they can step in and not play, not exactly fill the shoes of A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, but get them through the week and make catches when necessary. We saw Jahan Dotson last season as the third guy not see a lot of targets, but at least he showed when he finally got in there late in last season and what we've seen in camp this year, that when called upon, he can be that one guy, or at least be reliable when the ball is coming in his direction. And I think that's what they would want to see out of Metchie, if he does make the roster, which I'd assume he does. But, as you mentioned, it was kind of like a swap of guys that weren't going to be making their team's roster. And this was a swing, and we'll see what he does tonight. This will be his first game action in Eagles uniform, and I think it could say a little bit about what he's capable of.
Let's go back really quick to a Darius Cooper thing here from Matt over on YouTube. Matt wants to know if, I believe you're talking about Darius Cooper, not Cooper DeJean, because this could really apply to either player. Is Cooper a potential return guy? We haven't seen Darius Cooper return punts, Jeff. Am I mistaken?
No, we saw him return kicks. He did in the first preseason game. We've seen it occasionally at practice. I'm not sure if that's what he'll end up doing. They have maybe guys that are better suited to that role. In terms of the punt returning, I think it'd be a lot of ask of him. I don't know if he did it much at all, if at all, in college. I think more than likely you'll see Cooper, on the cover teams and the kickoff and punt returns teams that way. But I think kick return is probably more likely than punt return for Darius Cooper if that's something that they view him being able to do.
Thank you, Matt, for that question. Let's transition over to the positional battles that are going to continue to play out in this tonight's game, and that's something that Vic Fangio stated earlier this week, is that we can expect to see them continue to duke it out on the field, although things have changed from an injury standpoint, and we'll get into that. Let's talk about cornerback specifically, because I think this could be the biggest one to watch in today's game. Keely Ringo was not practicing on the last day of practice back on Wednesday. He sat out with a groin injury, so we have not seen him out yet on the field. We don't know exactly what his status is, but it does not seem likely that he is going to play in today's game. Adoree Jackson, meanwhile, has been taking the majority of the first team reps in at cornerback opposite Quinyon Mitchell. It looks like he is really in the pole position at this point to assume that gig come week one. However, then there's also the addition of Jacorian Bennett, who has played just one preseason game last week against the Cleveland Browns, and arguably he was the best cornerback on the field, in my opinion. He had a big pass breakup over the middle of the field. He also had the lowest targets caught against rate among Eagles cornerbacks at just 33%. So a good introductory moment there for Jacorian Bennett. We're expecting to see quite a bit of him tonight, so he could make his case potentially for the cornerback 2 role opposite Quinyon Mitchell. However, at this point, given the fact that Adoree Jackson has been here for the entire training camp, he has taken the most reps at that spot. Do you expect to see him now in week one at that outside cornerback spot opposite Mitchell, or do you think that Bennett still has some time to make a case?
I do. I'm not really even sure the Eagles know who's going to be the starting cornerback opposite Quinyon Mitchell. Yes, Adoree Jackson has taken the majority of the first team reps. I think even one practice recently, he took all of them. So, put me on the spot of the guys that they have right now on the roster. I would think it'd be Adoree Jackson. But as you mentioned, Jacorian Bennett has an opportunity here to maybe make a little dent into the advantage that Jackson has. Keely, I guess I wouldn't rule him out either. We'll have to see how this groin injury plays out here. If he's not playing tonight, that's going to hurt his chances. There's no denying that. He wasn't playing much with the first unit this past week, and it kind of seems justified based on what we've seen over the last several weeks in terms of his play. Inconsistency is probably the best term, I think, to describe the way that Keely has performed. Of late, Adoree Jackson doesn't completely wow me either. This is a guy that's over 30. I think sometimes he plays a little too soft, and that is to compensate for what he lacks in speed at this point in his career. So I don't think the Eagles are overly confident with really any of those guys right now. And look, every team is going to be weak at some position, and this could be the one for the Eagles. That being said, Howie's already made one move, bringing in Jacorian Bennett. I wouldn't rule out another move for a cornerback if they're just not happy with the guys that they have starting at that position. But to answer your question, yes, if the season started today and based upon what they have on the roster, I think it would have to be Jackson.
I've obviously been paying attention to what the Twitter universe has been saying about the outside cornerback spot, the vacancy, and there's a lot of chatter of people who are like, oh, why don't they try to go after a guy like Isaiah Rodgers, who the Eagles had on their roster last year as the primary backup. He's out there in Minnesota. There's lots of conversation right now about the Vikings being in the market for a receiver. Is there a depth receiver that the Eagles could flip over there in exchange for a guy like Isaiah Rodgers? How do you feel about that potential?
They liked him. Yeah, I mean, they would have brought him back if he didn't get what he got on the open market. And this was a guy who was just a backup last year, but he did step in at times and make plays when called upon. I don't know if they can trust him for an entire season. Isaiah Rodgers v. Adoree Jackson, I don't know. It could be just a toss-up. I should mention what I mentioned last week about Cooper DeJean and the possibility of him being there. And it just so happened the day that I asked Vic Fangio about that, because he said at the beginning of the camp, we're going to see DeJean not only at safety at some point, we're going to see him an outside cornerback and base personnel. He said, well, you should watch what happens out in the field today. And that's what we saw. We saw Cooper DeJean out at outside cornerback in base personnel. But I think Vic kind of put things in perspective when he was asked about, okay, what would it take for him to be there regularly, to be the guy on the outside cornerback for all plays? And he said, well, it's going to take someone to be able to step into the nickel role and fulfill it. And for him, that frankly, to go out there and do the outside cornerback job. This is something that he's not done at this level, and it's a lot to ask of him. I can't really base much of my evaluation on Cooper based, what we saw this past week on the field. Seemed to make some plays. I think Devontae Smith got him a few times. He gets a lot of guys. I just don't know at this point if that's what they can do. I threw it out there last week just because they don't have an answer, and maybe that's the answer. And maybe Mac McWilliams is your slot, or maybe you feel comfortable with Parry Nickerson being the slot, although I think Nickerson is probably more than likely not on the roster. They're trying to find the right combination of players. And it doesn't matter if it's Cooper outside or it's safety and base personnel or Cooper outside all the time. They want to find the best combination, but that may not be the best combination if they can't find someone to play that slot cornerback spot.
We'll get an extended look tonight, most likely, at some of those depth players like a Mac McWilliams, Parry Nickerson. We'll see if they're able to continue to build their cases to carve out big roles on this team. Whether or not they're able to do so remains the big question. Let's talk about the safety position, Jeff. This has also gotten interesting and marred by injury. Drew Makuba sustained yet another injury this training camp on Tuesday as he left practice early with a hamstring injury. He was sidelined on Wednesday, and we've seen him out here on the field. However, he is in shorts. I don't know if we necessarily would have expected to see him play in today's game anyway. However, it's looking increasingly unlikely due to the injury that he will not unlikely that he will play, so he will most likely not play. And that's a big shame for Makuba, just because of the fact that he made a really big splash in his preseason debut last week against the Browns. He had an interception for a pick six and a big fumble recovery as well. And after not playing in that preseason opener, I think that was big ground for Makuba to ultimately make a couple of big plays as he battles for the starting safety spot with Sidney Brown. We're still waiting to find out if we're going to see Brown in tonight's game. But given what we have seen from the two of them, Jeff, we saw Makuba make some big plays. We've seen Brown make plays at times. However, he has been less noticeable, I would say, whether that's a good or a bad thing. But despite Makuba's injury, did he do enough to win the job in a very limited time frame for week one? Or do you think that this could be Brown's role, regardless of whether or not Makuba is healthy?
Yeah, I'm leaning Sidney Brown just based upon the injury. Before the injury, I thought Makuba was trending towards being the starter based upon what he had done in that second preseason game and what we'd seen at practice the following week. And I just think that, again, I go back to the draft. I go back to Sidney being drafted prior around the same time. And why did they go out and get Makuba? This Sidney Brown wasn't a guy that Vic Fangio had drafted. I think Makuba, skill-wise, kind of traits-wise, fits in more to what Vic wants from that position. But the injury complicates things, quite frankly. And I'm not sure if he would have not played. There's a double negative for you. But in this preseason finale, had he not had the groin injury, I think he's got to get reps. They want this guy to get some reps. And he missed the first preseason game, and he missed a week of practice in camp. They want to get him out on the field and get used to seeing live football. And now all of a sudden, he can't do that. And will 1 week, let's say he's back next week, which I don't know. He's out here wearing a sleeve and he's not going to be playing. Can he do that? Even if he's back on Tuesday or Wednesday when they return to the field again. So it's going to be hard for him to make up that time. And if Brown isn't playing, which kind of just the vibe I got just watching him on the sideline there. If he isn't playing, that may suggest – he's on the roster, so maybe there's no point in playing him at all at this point, especially with Makuba. You don't want to get him hurt, but it would also suggest that maybe he's wrapped this competition up.
Now, another player I'm not necessarily expecting to see play in today's game is Jahad Campbell. He, interestingly enough, took all of the starting snaps alongside Zach Bond in the final day of practice on Wednesday. Throughout camp, most of the time we have seen Jeremiah Trotter Jr. take those initial first team reps, and of course Bond was dealing with a back contusion throughout a good chunk of training camp. So we would see Campbell and we would see Smile Mondin and we would see Trotter Jr. kind of share those snaps oftentimes. Now with Bond back in the mix, we saw exclusively Jahad Campbell taking those starting snaps alongside him, which I think is a pretty interesting development in this starting inside linebacker competition in the absence of Nakobe Dean, who is still recovering from his offseason surgery. I think the big reason why, a big indication of the fact that we probably won't see much of Campbell or even Trotter Jr. in today's game is the fact that they signed a linebacker the other day to the roster, most likely just for the purposes of having him play in today's game. But given the fact that Campbell did take all of those first team reps alongside Bond in practice the other day, and just of course his body of work, he's had a couple of good performances in the preseason games. Has he won this week one job?
Yeah, essentially. Look, they drafted him in the first round for a reason. It was only a matter of time before he was starting there. It was just when, what week of the season would it happen, and the fact that he came back from camp, came to camp ready to play, despite what Vic Fangio had said back in June that he didn't think he'd be ready until some point in August. I think all of a sudden got that ball rolling in that direction. I give Jeremiah Trotter Jr. lots of credit. It wasn't like he lost the job. I think Campbell just went out and did what he had to do. You could see it from day one, the explosiveness, the athleticism, the length, the fact that he can, shoot the gap, defend the run, can also run with tight ends, can run with running backs out of the backfield in terms of his coverage. He can certainly blitz. He can even bump up to the line and be like an overload linebacker and rush the passer. We could see him at end, so he has that type of versatility. I'm not calling the race right now because I still feel like, okay, maybe they trust Trotter. Don't want to put too much on Campbell from day one. Maybe in terms of the personnel packages, they split it up between the two of them. That's a possibility. But it's going in the direction of Campbell being the starter. And, again, on the spot, probably it's him on week one, but it's going to be happening soon.
I want to acknowledge this question here from Gregory over on YouTube. We just talked about this, but Gregory wants to know if Cooper DeJean could play at the outside cornerback spot in base and then play in the slot in nickel. It could be a possibility, and we have seen that in practice, however, especially recently. However, Vic Fangio said this earlier this week, it's going to be contingent on the development and the progress of some of those other options. If Cooper were to spend time exclusively on the outside, that's what I guess Fangio was alluding to. If he were to spend time exclusively on the outside, it would require some of the players, other depth players, to make more progress at nickel, the Perry Nickersons of the world, perhaps a Mac McWilliams. But if you're wondering if he can play CB2 in base while playing the slot in nickel, it is very much a possibility. We've seen both DeJean at cornerback 2. We've seen him at safety in base 2. It'll end up ultimately be one of those options, as DeJean ultimately they want him on the field at all times, and they don't want to take him off the field. Let's transition over to the offense, and specifically looking at this offensive line. We got a really extended look last week at some of the depth players along the offensive line, and listen, it was a really shaky outing for the offensive line as a whole. It seemed like quarterbacks Kyle McCord and Dorian Thompson-Robinson were under siege all day. It was a really rough one, particularly on the edges. Matt Pryor, Kendall Lamb, Miles Hinton, Cameron Williams. It was not their best day. Pryor allowed a sack. He allowed a hurry. Kendall Lamb allowed a quarterback hit. Miles Hinton gave up a pressure that ultimately led to the pick six that Dorian Thompson-Robinson threw. When you look at the way that the Eagles have typically had, or at least last year with their depth tackle, their swing tackle, they usually have a player who is able to play either position. When you look at it this year, it doesn't seem like it's that way. It seems like they have a preference for one on one side and one on another side. Is there any long-term concern, Jeff, that you have about this depth tackle spot?
Yeah. Now, look, before we get started on that, they have a great offensive line. They have two of the best tackles in the NFL. So this isn't a major concern. We're not talking about a starter here. There's plenty of teams in the NFL that don't even have starting caliber tackles at their respective flanks. So that being said, Lane Johnson, is 35. Jordan Mailata is creeping towards 30, maybe even over 30. No, he's not 30 yet, but he's been around a long time. He's gotten hurt, and it's going to happen at some point. So maybe look out if the Eagles go in with whether it be Matt Pryor or Kendall Lamb at one of those tackle spots. Pryor's done it before. I mean, the Eagles had him here when they drafted him in 2018, started him at tackle, moved him to guard. When he eventually left for the Colts and then the Bears, and I think he was a stint with the 49ers in there somewhere. And guard has traditionally been where he's played more of and had more success. So I'd be a little nervous about him being your number one backup tackle. I don't think he's played particularly well in camp beyond just what we saw in the preseason. Of course, that offensive line looked pretty darn good blocking for Tanner McKee in the first game, the first preseason game. So I think some of the quarterback play hindered those guys in that second game. And then Kendall Lamb, he's been around for quite a long time. I think he's entering his 10th season in the league. Maybe he's kind of hit that cliff and kind of starting to tail off. So I'd be a little concerned about him. He's played, but he was a swing guy. I mean, they brought him in to be that guy. He has played as much on the left side as he has on the right, but they've had him almost exclusively the left side. So I wonder what his future is going to be. And Hinton and Williams are projects at this point. The rookies, you've seen glimpses here and there. So I don't think it's a major concern, but I think it's for the first time in quite some time. I feel like they don't really know what they have there yet. And traditionally at this point, Jeff Stoutland has it figured out. And so that would be the one thing that I would say about the offensive line when it comes to their depth.
I'm very interested to see who ends up making the 53-man roster and who doesn't. That's not to say that whoever doesn't make the 53-man roster won't sign to the practice squad and continue to play a role in some capacity on this team. But I think that offensive line, that can get a little crowded there, and there's a lot of bodies in that room, a lot of bodies that could potentially have some sort of role on the team. So I'll be really curious to see who ends up making the initial 53 and then who they end up signing to the practice squad. And I feel like, I don't know, maybe a Kendall Lamb could end up on that list. I know we've talked about Brett Toth as a potential practice squad option, as he has been in the past. That's going to be a really interesting spot to keep an eye on. All right, Jeff, let's transition into our player picks. We've talked about a lot of different players so far. However, if there is one that you are really interested in keeping an eye on, who is it going to be?
I don't know about really interested in. We're kind of down to the barrel here in preseason game number 3. But let's go with Mac McWilliams. We mentioned him earlier. You did, Olivia, in terms of the outside cornerback competition. He has been in the mix. I mean, Vic Fangio is not ruling him out, and he likes him. Like a lot of rookies, inconsistent. He didn't play a lot of the slot in college, but they've tried him out there. If you look at his size, his build, he kind of seems like he'd probably be a better guy inside than outside. But I want to see him out here just because I feel like he's not out of the competition for the starter spot, believe it or not. And he's played well when he's, when they've had these preseason games. And I imagine he's going to play a lot of snaps. So I'm going to go with Mac McWilliams. Who do you got?
Good choice. It's all right. Here we go. Well, interestingly enough, Versetti over on X, they say that their player to watch is Antoine Powell-Ryland. I'm going to stick in the edge rushers core, in the universe of the edge rushers. I'm going with Azeez Ojulari. We've talked about him a little bit on this show as someone who we have been waiting to see more from throughout training camp, and he did. I think last week he had his best showing in the entire grand scheme of things in training camp. He had a sack against the Cleveland Browns. He fared pretty well, I would say, too. He was really active and disruptive in the backfield in the 2 joint practices that the Eagles had against the Browns. It's just a matter of, can we see that consistency over a sustained period of time? We have not yet seen that. I'll be really interested to see if we see more of Ojulari doing what he did so well last week against the Browns. The Eagles could use some contributions from their depth edge rushers rotation, and Ojulari right now, someone like Joshua Uche, who was also brought in to fill out the rotation behind Nolan Smith and Jalix Hunt. Those guys are going to be really important for this team. This is it's a young group. It's a somewhat unproven group, and Ojulari has a big opportunity in Philadelphia to show that he is capable of playing at the level that he once displayed here at MetLife Stadium as a rookie for the New York Giants. I'm very interested to see how he performs tonight. All right, Jeff. Also, we gotta get our predictions in before we wrap up today. We've been having, last week, or 2 weeks ago in the preseason opener, I was pretty spot on about my high expectations for Tanner McKee. Last week it was all you. You were all over the Patrick Johnson big play. He had a big stop on an end around attempt for a loss of 11 yards. Another big play from Patrick Johnson. Because you're riding the wave right now, Jeff. What do you got? What's your prediction for this week?
I recall you saying you didn't think tackle for a loss was a big play. We had a little bit of an argument about that. I think it counts.
Play. I'll give it to you.
I think it counts. All right. That's what I was imagining. Okay, what am I going to go with? Oh, Montreal Johnson. Yeah, that's what I have it written down here. Montreal Johnson. You guys may not know who he is. He's undrafted rookie running back. He got hurt early in camp. But before that, he flashed. He popped to me. And I'm not saying this guy's going to make the roster, but, I don't think A.J. Dillon's guaranteed anything, and maybe they love him based upon what he's done since the injury. I'm sure he's going to get a ton of carries in this game. So I'm going with 50 rushing yards, over under, and I will probably let's go under, because I don't know if the O-line is going to block that much for him. And there's two other guys on the depth chart behind him that should get their share of carries as well. And if they like them, they don't want to kind of use them too much.
It's an interesting point you make about A.J. Dillon, Jeff. Great prediction. I'm not trying to go off topic here, but Gregory over on YouTube also makes this point too. Will A.J. Dillon remain on the Eagles, especially on the 53-man roster specifically? I would expect that if he doesn't make the 53-man roster, he'll end up on the practice squad. And only because I think, they might want that spot for someone else. I think A.J. Dillon has had a good summer. It's just the fact that he is a vested veteran. He could potentially sign to the practice squad. He's on a minimum contract. So might as well try, if they need the space, that could potentially be a possibility. It's a good point. All right, I was wrong last week. I did not get my Obo Okoronkwo sack. That did not happen. This week, I'm going with another step for Kyle McCord. He has made some steady progress, I would say. Last week was not his best outing, I'm sure, of his entire career, but it was certainly an improvement over his preseason debut the week before that. He went 8 for 16 for 47 yards and a touchdown. I'm going to go a tick over that. I'm going to say he's going to throw for 75 passing yards today. I don't know if that might be a bold statement given what we know about the offensive line last week. It was not a great week just to be an Eagles quarterback last week, but I think McCord will continue to make progress of some kind in today's game. He was able to show that last week, and I think he can do it this week too. All right, everyone, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Game Day Central. Just a reminder, if you're not already over there, head on over to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day, where you can chat with us throughout the game. So we look forward to seeing you there soon.
And if you want even more Eagles coverage, check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds, where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about your favorite team. New episodes drop weekly at inquire.com/podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Once again, that is all for today, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.